Hello and welcome to my channel, Iansan Gaming. With version 5.5 around the corner, or potentially even released by the time you see this video, we now know what the banners are going to look like for the most part, and in this video I'm going to go over what you need to know about each banner and whether or not they are good fits for your account. In the first half of version 5.5, we'll be getting Varesa, the new 5-star character, a rerun of Xianyun, as well as the new 4-star character Iansan. And in the second half of version 5.5, we are getting a rerun of Xilonen as well as a rerun of Venti. And get ready for the segue of the century to today's sponsor, Once Human. If you love open world games like Genshin Impact but want something a bit more mature and stranger, then get ready for Once Human for mobile, launching on April 23rd, 2025. 30 million people have pre-registered for it globally, so what are you waiting for? Once Human is free-to-play friendly with allergies to pay-to-win mechanics. The game is a post-apocalyptic multiplayer survival game, rated 8 out of 10 by IGN. It delivers the full PC gameplay experience right on your phone. You also have the freedom to choose between PvP servers, and if murdering each other isn't your thing, PvE servers. Explore diverse maps, battle terrifying monsters, and uncover hidden treasures in a world where anything can happen. Gather blueprints, craft powerful weapons and armor, and face off against formidable bosses. And of course, playing with friends makes it even better, and you can team up to tackle dungeons, build settlements, or engage in intense PvP battles. The most anticipated free-to-play friendly open-world mobile game is almost here. Pre-register now and get ready to survive, explore, and dominate once Once Human launches on April 23rd. Let's start by talking about Varesa. Varesa is quite a strong overall DPS character, and she is an electro plunge DPS character. And what's nice about Varesa's banner is we have confirmation that Iansan will be on the first half with Varesa as well as Xianyun's banners. Okay, so we got official confirmation as to what these banners will look like, and Hoyoverse stopped being allergic to money after Mizuki's banner, because this is one of the best 4-star lineups on a banner that we've seen. I'll talk a bit more about the banner as a whole after I finish talking about Iansan and Varesa. What this means is that while you're pulling for Varesa, you have a very good chance to get Iansan, and just like that, if you get Constellation 0 Varesa and Constellation 0 Iansan, you already have half of a functional and very strong team. Now, in terms of how strong Varesa plus Iansan teams are, they are looking to be overall quite strong, all things considered, and I would consider them to definitely be a top tier DPS character. And what's especially nice about Varesa, especially with Iansan, is that she actually is quite flexible when it comes to team building, where she can be built with many different team archetypes, like an overloaded team, or with just a bunch of conventional buffers that buffer damage, and Dendro isn't useless either in either Aggravate or Quick Bloom. Because of her flexibility, Varesa plus Iansan plus, really just two hodgepodge characters will be great for Imaginarium theaters that have Electro. And this is nice because, well, obviously, if you can bring Electro, that means Varesa and Iansan will both be usable there. Now, there is definitely worse pull value if you have strong Electro DPS characters like Chlorond or Constellation 2 Raiden, or I guess Sino to a lesser extent. But me personally, I do think Varesa is a new level of power for Electro DPS characters. Now, at this exact moment, we don't have any official details on her constellation, so I will reserve that for another time. In particular, you can actually check out my upcoming Varesa guide that will be coming out shortly after her release. Next, we'll actually need to talk about Iansan, who is going to be on the same banner as Varesa. Iansan is basically the Bennett alternative that we've all been waiting for, changing gameplay from Circle Impact to Fitness Impact. Iansan maintains her attack buff based on how much your characters move, so she pairs really well with characters that move a lot. She has two main advantages over Bennett and one main disadvantage. Her main advantage over Bennett is her ability to activate the Cinder City, which is 40% bonus damage to whatever element, and that is very, very strong. And the other main Bennett fit is that she finally frees you from Circle Impact, allowing you to actually move around, especially for melee characters, to enemies that have left, well, Bennett's circle. Her main disadvantage is that she does not heal nearly as much as Bennett does, so do keep that in mind. With all this in mind, she has amazing compatibility with all the recent Natlan attack scalers. Varesa, Mavuika, Gaming, Kanish, and Chaska all work very well with her, because these are all attack scalers that can, well, move around a lot, as well as appreciate less circle impact. As I've already mentioned though, because she's with Varesa's banner, you're pulling for both of them, which make a very solid core to build a team around. And I do want to quickly talk about Mavwika as well. Mavwika can be freed from Circle Impact by replacing Bennett with Iansan. This is very nice in situations where obviously again you need to move. Alternatively, if you don't have Xilonen, Iansan is a very decent Xilonen alternative because she will provide a very decent amount of Night Soul points for Mavwika, as well as providing Mavwika similar buffs to Mavwika's damage, especially as you get more constellations for Iansan. And of course, Iansan is a nice buff for overloaded teams, especially those with an Electro on fielder that also happens to move around a lot, like Varesa. Now looking at this tier list, we can see that at least she's an amazing option for Varesa, Mavwika, Gaming, Kanish, and Chaska. But for the rest of the characters on this list, she does have some compatibility issues either with maintaining her buff or with the buffs that she can provide. For example, with Xiao, she cannot provide the Cinder City buffs and she cannot swirl. But the fact that she is even in the discussion as a Bennett side grade, even for these alternative option characters, makes her an incredibly strong character. And her being a 4-star character on this banner is just the cherry on top. So yeah, if you already have like a fully established team for most of the characters on this list and you don't need another mini Bennett for the other side of Abyss, she does have much less pull value. So it does heavily depend on how well invested your current team is that you're considering Iansan for. For example, circling back to Xiao, he has Farazan, Furina, and Xianyun to choose from, so it's hard to justify slotting in a character like Iansan. But still, overall, in my opinion, Varesa plus Iansan has a very high banner value. So with Chevreuse on this banner, she is one of the best 4-star characters in the game in my opinion. She provides 40% attack, 40% pyro and electro resistance shred, and lots of healing for the on-field agent if she's in an overloaded team. Now at Constellation 6, she also provides up to 60% bonus damage, which is absolutely massive, but in my opinion, she is great at Constellation 0 and she is incredible at Constellation 6. Now Chevreuse is also really good because she also doesn't use any of the meta 5-star supports like Xilonen, Sitlali, Kazuha, etc. So this frees up team building flexibility for your other side. And one minor issue in my opinion with Chevreuse is that unless you have both Pyro and Electro as the elements for Imaginarium Theater, she definitely won't be as good there, but in my opinion that's a pretty minor drawback. Now the next 4-star character on this banner is also really good, but with a caveat, and that he is the best 4-star DPS character in the game. Well, the issue with Gaming is that most of us do have Mavwika, Arlecchino, or Hu Tao, so he's probably the least valuable character here, but if you don't have one of the top tier Pyro DPS characters, then he is quite good. However, his Constellation 6 is really what makes him so good, providing literally 80% crit value. And also what really pushes Gaming over the edge is Sitlali, so do keep all that in mind if you do plan on pulling for Gaming, but this will put you a bit closer to his Constellation 6 if that's something that you want. So yeah, with both Chevreuse and Iansan on this banner, you are literally getting 3/4 of a very strong and meta Varesa team, as well as building up those constellations for those 4-star characters, assuming you get them, towards making a very free-to-play friendly and very strong Varesa team. And of course, in the 4th slot, you can easily slot in Bennett, Mavwika, or Pyro Traveler, who will all do quite well with Varesa, making this basically the closest thing to pulling for a full meta team on a single banner, which does make this banner incredibly valuable. And because now we know what characters are on this banner, I mean, this is about as close to a 10 out of 10 banner that you can get. Now, I wanted to give a warning here. Unless you're okay with the 5 stars on this banner, then be very wary about wishing specifically for 4-star characters, because there is a chance you could get Gaming and Noelle 10 times in a row while trying to get Iansan or Chevreuse, because there's just no hard guarantee for 4 stars unlike 5 stars, and there's always going to be those people that don't get the 4-star character that they want, and that could be you. So just be careful about that and be mindful that, hey, you might end up getting the 5-star character before the 4-star you want. The next character to talk about is Xianyun, and Xianyun is a pretty tricky character in my opinion. Now, if you do have Sitlali and Constellation 6 Bennett, then Gaming and Diluc become pretty darn strong, as well as Hu Tao to a lesser extent. Now, if your favorite characters are just Diluc, Xiao, and Gaming, then you probably won't regret pulling for Xianyun. But I gotta be completely honest, I think that she does feel pretty clunky to play. The plunge playstyle is often quite janky because of monster hitboxes getting in the way, not allowing you to jump fully, as well as other issues. And yes, this does actually apply to Varesa, so chalk this one up to the Varesa section as well. Not only that, but most characters that have been designed actually don't want you to do any plunge attacks at all in their kit. Like for example, Milani, you definitely don't want to plunge with her. And if we actually look at the history of plunge related characters being released, well, Xiao was released in version 1.3, then Gaming in 4.4, and Varesa in 5.5. So maybe we'll see another plunge archetype character in the future, but Xianyun is indeed also starting to become an older character since she was released in version 4.4, and barring very few characters, most characters tend to get worse with age. Now in terms of whether you should invest into her Refinement 1 or Constellations, her signature weapon, the Crane's Echoing Call, is a pretty good signature weapon for her, alleviating her energy issues as well as providing a nice plunge buff to the team. Meanwhile, her Constellation 2 is the big one, essentially doubling the flat damage buff that she provides to plunge damage for her team. Now you may look at this Constellation chart and see, oh my god, a 45% increase to Xiao's damage. Well, not only is she particularly great at buffing Xiao's damage, but this buff is also diluted by other types of buffs, like for example, attack buffs like from Bennett or whatever that might be part of the team. So yeah, this performance is definitely overinflated, but I still wanted to have some calcs for her. Me personally, I think pulling for other characters that enable a plunge team better, if that's the type of team you want to pull for, like for example pulling for Sitlali's rerun in the future for melt plunge teams, is a much better pull value than pulling for Xianyun's Constellations. So yeah, I gotta be completely honest, I personally don't strongly recommend her unless your favorite characters are Diluc, Xiao, and Gaming, as Varesa doesn't actually need Xianyun since she also has Chevreuse Overloaded, which does quite well. But if you are pulling for those specific characters, Diluc, Xiao, and Gaming, then Xianyun is a solid choice. Oh, and you also get Iansan on Xianyun's banner, which is nice. And one last rule about Xianyun is that she can also be used as a Jean substitute for Furina, even if you don't want to do any plunge type damage. This is an alright side grade function to Jean, but it is not worth the Primo Gems in my opinion. And one more important bit of data is that for Abyss 12 usage, she's only at 20.6%, at least from versions 4.3 to 5.2. So again, she's a character I only recommend if you know exactly what you want out of her. Let's also briefly talk about Varesa plus Xianyun's weapon banner, which will include the Vivid Notions as well as Xianyun's weapon, the Crane's Echoing Call. The Crane's Echoing Call leads to roughly a 17% increase to Xiao's damage, which is a nice upgrade for a Xiao team. As for Varesa's weapon, well, that will increase Varesa's damage significantly, and we do actually have official information on the Vivid Notions, where it has a high base attack with 44.1% crit damage, as well as providing 28% universal attack and up to 68% crit damage for plunge type damage. So besides Varesa, you can use this with, for example, a Xianyun team with a plunge Yanfei or plunge Klee to make them deal a lot more damage. So yeah, it's kind of an interesting weapon banner in the sense that it will benefit either Varesa's team or a Xianyun team that doesn't even include Varesa, regardless of what weapon you end up getting. Still, not really the best weapon banner unless you want these weapon banners for those characters. Also keep in mind, if you get the Crane's Echoing Call while pulling for Varesa's signature weapon, and you end up getting Varesa's signature weapon as well, then the Crane's Echoing Call without Xianyun is basically dead weight on your account. Alright, I also forgot to mention that the Crane's Echoing Call is likely going to be a pretty usable weapon on Varesa herself, assuming you don't get her signature weapon and you get Xianyun's instead on accident while pulling for Varesa's signature weapon, because it alleviates a lot of the energy requirements that Varesa has, allowing you to put those stats into other stats as well. Okay, so we also got some details about the 4-star weapon, starting with the Fruitful Hook. This is good for any Claymore character that wants to do plunge attacks, so basically Diluc and Gaming. And personally, I definitely prefer this thing over the Serpent Spine because you don't have to wait a million years before you can play the game. Now the next weapon is the Flower Wreathed Feathers. This one is a pretty decent 4-star option for Chaska, and it should work as well for Melt Ganyu, but besides that, I don't really think it's really good for anyone else. Now the Sturdy Bone want, I guess you can use it with Chlorond. And finally, the Mountain Bracing Bolt. This is pretty good with Xiao's passive because now you can climb for a lot longer, but yeah. And we have the Catalyst, which overall though, this weapon banner is obviously just a weapon banner you pull for specifically Varesa and Xianyun. Alright, let's next talk about Xilonen, who I have a lot to say about. Xilonen is one of the most universal characters in the game because she provides 36% resistance shred to Petch elements, Pyro, Electro, Cryo, and Hydro, as well as Geo. And on top of that, she's also a great user of the Cinder City artifact set to provide 40% bonus damage to the elements involved. On top of that, she can also use the Archaic Petra for if there's another Cinder City user on her team. And on top of that she can even use the Instructor set specifically in rotations where, again, there's already a Cinder City user in your team, and the rotation is either awkward for Archaic Petra or you just don't like the Archaic Petra's consistency issues. All in all, she's generally much better than, for example, the Viridescent Veneers set because her resistance shred persists for multi-wave content. So for characters that hate switching off, like for example Hu Tao, she'll maintain her buffs. She also provides a lot of single target healing with her burst, and while not usually enough to easily max out Furina's fanfare, it's good enough to still justify using Furina with Xilonen. Now some of her weaknesses are that her Constellation 0 buffs aren't usually enough to outstrip dedicated supports like Farazan for Xiao and Wander, or even Bennett for attack scalers. However, for non-attack scalers, this is where things get interesting because she's basically uncontested at the moment since her buffs are universal, being bonus damage and resistance shred. So yeah, as we can see in this list of characters compatible with Xilonen, the list is comically long, and honestly I decided not to include a bunch of characters because that'd pretty much just be almost every single Petch and Geo character. However, she is definitely perfect for, again, as you can see in this list, most Geo characters as well as characters that don't predominantly scale off of attack. And Mavuika as well because she generates a ton of points from Mavuika. Now one reason why she isn't absolutely perfect for characters that scale off of attack is because not only does Bennett exist, but we are also getting Iansan as well, which means there is a real opportunity cost for choosing between Xilonen or a buffer like Iansan. But regardless, with how long this list is, there's a reason why Xilonen's Abyss usage rates have been so high ever since her release. Because Xilonen is such a universal support, her Abyss usage rate has been around 85%, which is comically high, and this will likely continue for a very long time. Like just look at Kazuha's usage rate historically, which has just been so comically high. Although interestingly, Kazuha's usage rate has dropped significantly, and this is because we are finally getting more supports like Xilonen as well as Citlali. And this brings me to my next concern, which is Citlali. Citlali is a new type of support, which is just a very overpowered support, but for a very specific niche. We've already kind of seen this with some characters like Xianyun as well as Chevreuse for Overloaded, but Citlali is kind of on another level where she just boosts melt performance so much that we can expect more characters like Citlali to be in the future, which will gradually push out Xilonen from these teams where she's amazing for, but not necessarily the absolute best for. And a couple more bonus points for Xilonen is that at Constellation 0, she is even a competent DPS character. It's not great, but it's surprisingly competent. Like for example, you can use her in a Plunge Xianyun team or in a Hyper Geo team, thus making her even more universal for newer accounts. She's also great for exploration because why not? She's literally the best climber in the game and she has decent ground speed. Now with all that being said, there's a really good chance that the 4 stars on her banner aren't great. We're looking at Noelle, who hasn't had a rerun in about 12 banners, Beidou in 14, Layla in 14, Farazan in 14, Lynette in 15, Freminette in 15, and of those, I think only Farazan being one that I would actually recommend, and only for Wander and Xiao. Because we know Iansan isn't going to be on her banner, the poor 4-star options will likely make her banner less valuable. Alright, and let's briefly talk about her signature weapon and Constellations. If you do get her Constellation 2, it is obviously incredibly good, adding largely relevant buffs to most of the characters that she would support. And her signature weapon, the Peak Patrol Song, is great as well, providing around 25.6% bonus damage. So let's talk about the weapon banners in the second half, which will include the Peak Patrol Song and the Elegy for the End. Now technically, the Peak Patrol song is usable on literally every single sword character in the game because all you gotta do is bop him twice with your basic attack to activate its buff, but it does scale off of defense, which means that for many characters, it either sacrifices too much damage or utility to properly build them for this weapon. Now obviously the Peak Patrol song is a very nice weapon for Xilonen. And looking at this chart, we can see that it adds a modest but noticeable 11% increase to Mavuika's damage in comparison to Xilonen without the Peak Patrol song. It's not as game-changing as, for example, getting a recent signature weapon on their respective DPS, but the fact that it's universal is what makes it good. Now, of the other sword characters that can use the Peak Patrol song, there are a few that stand out more so than others, with Jean being one of them. Jean is already great for Fiorina teams because of her full party heal and Viridescent Veneer swirl, and now she can provide a bit more of a buff with almost no opportunity cost because Jean heals so much it doesn't really matter, especially if you don't have the Freedom Sworn or depending on what character you're trying to buff. Some other characters include, for example, the Pyro main character, whose damage is, well, kind of copium, so yeah, they may as well use this weapon if they have it. Now the other weapon on this banner, the Elegy for the End, is also a good weapon, providing 20% attack and 100 elemental mastery. This is actually quite a universal bow, and frankly they just don't make weapons like they used to anymore, but it's usable on most bow characters, but obviously Venti is likely one of the best users for it. The issue with the Elegy for the End isn't that the bow isn't good, in fact it is very good. In particular, the top meta teams don't really need this weapon, especially compared to signatures for newer DPS characters. But still, the timelessness of this bow is very good and will continue to be used by bow characters moving forward. But still, this is overall a really good weapon, and you will have to look at what bow characters you have and what team they plan to be on if you're considering the Elegy for the End. So overall, this is definitely one of the better weapon banners that we've gotten, and is a nice boost to anyone's account for those that end up getting either of these weapons. Alright, and the last thing to talk about is Venti. I almost forgot about him, but he's a character that frankly you pull for if you like him. His usage rates since versions 4. I can't even say this without laughing because of how sad it is, but his usage rates from versions 4.3 to 5.2 have been tragically 4.4%, which is literally Dea levels of usage. The issue isn't that he's terrible, it's that he is an all or nothing character who either dumpsters the content or is an overpriced Viridescent Veneer. The stuff that he's good against, like Hilichurls, is just stuff that he can pick up, and they're usually a bunch of weak enemies that you don't have much trouble with. Now he does have some valuable niches like against grouped up enemies and differing elemental shields, like multiple Abyss Lectors that you manage to clump together, but again, this is quite niche. Modern characters just don't need his grouping, and frankly Kazuha's grouping in many situations is just better. And Kazuha also provides 40% additional damage on top of the Viridescent Veneer resistance shred. And other characters like Neuvillette with his spin to win tech and Mavuika with her giant donuts, they just don't need that grouping that Venti provides. So he's just not compatible with a lot of DPS characters, and modern enemies have literally been designed to not be able to be picked up, which makes Venti feel pretty bad to use. Still though, in a handful of easy situations as well as some Imaginarium Theater chambers, Venti is quite useful, as well as for some events where, they spawn waves of trash enemies. But yeah, otherwise Venti is pretty bad, and I can't recommend him unless you just like him as a character. So yeah, hopefully this gave you a decent overview of the banners in version 5.5 and who you should consider pulling for. Let me know who you're going to pull for down in the comments below. And also, don't forget to check out today's sponsor, Once Human, down in the description below. As always, I appreciate every single one of you. This is I Want to Lose, signing out.